Nissan has plugged the city car-shaped gap in its model range with this frugal little Pixo. Its design may not be unique, but budget buyers will be more interested in its tiny running costs and refreshing back-to-basics approach.
Nissan has historically never had a city car in its range, a tiny sub-super mini to compete with diminutive little models like Ford's Ka and Vauxhall's Agila. Or has it? Look closely at the figures and it's clear that the Nissan Micra, which competes against Fiesta-sized super minis, is no bigger and in many cases actually smaller than the compact urban runabouts that compete in today's city car sector. Now, in some respects that's okay. The Micra trades space for quirky character, but you can't blame buyers for being confused. So Nissan has moved to simplify things by slotting in this Pixo range underneath it. Here, there's no argument. This is a proper city car. But is it a proper Nissan? The Japanese brand has, after all, simply rebadged Suzuki's Alto to create this model, and visual differences between the two cars are minimal. But will buyers care? Almost certainly not. Today's gloomy times mean you can't be too picky about such things. What really matters in a car of this type is dinky functionality and saintly running costs, both delivered by this Pixo along with an entry-level asking price that usefully undercuts its Suzuki stablemate.
The on-road experience is exactly the same as that served up by the Suzuki version of this car, which means that there's a bit of adjustment involved in driving something this small. It's only 3.5 metres in length and feebly powered. There's just 67 brake horsepower on tap. Still, once installed in the rather upright driving position, it's entirely possible to enjoy the experience. Like most three-cylinder engines, the distinctive thrum from under the bonnet will be seen as either noisy or characterful from the only 1 litre petrol engine that's on offer. You're going to have to decide which, because you're going to be hearing quite a lot of it, courtesy of the fact that meaningful forward motion is only really achieved by working the manual 5-speed gearbox vigorously within the upper reaches of the rev range. Now, performance figures are rather academic in a car like this, but if you're interested, it feels a bit faster than the 14-second rest to 60 time would suggest. The maximum speed is an academic 96 miles an hour. Much more relevant is the super tight turning circle of 4.5 metres, which makes this model ideal for manoeuvring into tight parking spaces, maximising the urban threadability of its narrowness, or executing the odd cheeky U-turn. And indeed, this is a model that responds well to quick direction changes, and that's a city car attribute that also makes it quite fun on a twisting country road. Here you've got decent amounts of grip, well-controlled body roll, and there's reasonable feedback too from the electrically assisted power steering. Nimbleness helps too. This car is lighter than many of its competitors. It's 885 kilograms, so it weighs what a city car should. Small wonder it's so frugal.
Nissan's design input into this car was limited to providing bumpers, headlamps, a revised bonnet and a corporate front grille. Now, the result of all that is that this car has a more distinctive front end than its Suzuki counterpart, but the two models look identical from behind. Inside, the differences are limited to a change in seat trim, and you'll certainly be aware of how little you spent. Exposed screw heads, the lack of a glove box, rear windows that pop out rather than wind down, and plenty of cheap grey plastic, see to that. Still, it's all pretty well put together, and in a funny way, this simplicity is rather refreshing. In front of the driver, there's a large dash pod with a big speedo in it and a digital LCD display beneath, incorporating a fuel gauge. And plusher models have a dash top pod including a rev counter. The Pixo is built by Suzuki's partner Maruti in India, a land where whole families somehow managed to cram into tiny cars, and there's not much market for 3-door models. No surprise then that this Nissan comes in 5-door form only, and that there's pretty generous room in the back.
4 adults can quite comfortably be seated, even if they're 6 foot plus, and plentiful headroom makes this cabin feel light and airy despite the thick rear C-pillars that can occasionally represent a parking problem. The tiny 3.5 metre length means a necessarily truncated 129 litre boot, and it's accessible via a high loading lip here. Of course, if you're travelling 2 up, you can extend it to 367 litres, but you won't be able to do so via the split folding seats that I'm using here unless you go for a plusher model. If you're buying a little city car runabout today, you've to choose between style and sense. Yes, it would be nice to have something trendy like a Ford Ka or a Fiat 500, or something nicely finished like a Vauxhall Aguila or a Suzuki Splash. But all of those alternatives retail at the kind of money that would buy you an entry-level version of a properly sized Super Mini from the next class up. Which is why real city car growth in this sector is being seen amongst cars that retail at or below the £7,000 price point. Now, this Pixo is one of those, and it competes against models like not only its Suzuki Alto designed stablemate, but also Hyundai's i10, Kia's Picanto and Chevrolet's Matiz. Now, against these, it's cheaper by about £250 than the two we'd recommend, the Suzuki and the Hyundai, and only the Chevrolet and the Kia can undercut it, and both of those are much older designs with more feebly powered engines. The small price advantage that this Nissan enjoys in entry-level form over its Suzuki stablemate is accounted for by its lack of side airbags, electric front windows and remote central locking as opposed to the base Suzuki. Now, these are all items that are added as you progress up the Pixo range, but the base level model comes only with power steering, CD player and twin front airbags, and that's about it. You have to progress up to plusher Pixo models for things like air conditioning, traction control, a rev counter, curtain airbags, alloy wheels, front fog lamps, split folding rear seats and the kind of ESP stability control system that can get you out of trouble if you enter a corner too fast or you're on an icy road. Now, add all this lot and create a £9,000 car, and you might as well have bought a Micra instead. Now, running costs will be a major attraction for potential Pixo customers, with the 1 litre petrol engine capable of returning 64.2 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle. That's very impressive. The urban cycle is designed to replicate city car motoring, so the 51.4 miles to the gallon that the Pixo returns here is probably more representative of what real world owners are likely to get in day-to-day use. Now, the CO2 emissions are similarly impressive. The 103 grams per kilometre average that this car returns, grouping it in with the very cleanest cars that are available, and a stop-start system that cuts out the engine in urban traffic or at the lights, can take it even lower than that. All this puts it pretty much best in class, alongside, of course, its Suzuki Alto sister car. If you want a comparison to other obvious rivals, then you're looking at getting about 8 miles more to every gallon than a comparable Chevrolet, Kia or Hyundai, and putting about 10 to 15 grams per kilometre of CO2 less into the atmosphere. If you're really intent on spoiling this impressive showing, then there is an automatic version of this Nissan available, but it only returns 54 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 122 grams per kilometre of CO2. What else? Well, insurance groupings range between 1 and 2, and you can expect mechanical durability to be good. Not a lot goes wrong. This is, after all, a model designed to be robust and low maintenance. Residual values, well, you should get about 40% of your initial purchase price back after 3 years or 36,000 miles. Now, Nissan didn't spend a whole lot on developing this car, but someone else did. And the benefit of all that to UK buyers with this Pixo is that they're getting sense and sensibility on a tiny budget. It's a design that shows clearly just how far no-frills city car motoring has come in the last few years.
The little runabouts we were buying until just a few years ago now seem ridiculously thirsty and dirty next to models like this Nissan. So do many of today's ordinary super minis. So ask yourself, do your modern motoring needs really see you needing something more sophisticated and pricier than this? For many, the answer will be a resounding no.